I remember the first time I noticed how delay quietly settles into a life. It did not arrive with noise. It came in small moments. A truck idling outside an apartment before dawn. A coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter. A task that could be done in 10 minutes somehow pushed to tomorrow. Nothing dramatic, just a soft refusal to begin. Modern life moves fast, yet inside many people there is a strange heaviness, like driving with the parking brake half on. Days fill up with effort, but not with progress. What follows is familiar. The longer something waits, the louder the inner voice gets. It says you should have started already. It says others are ahead. It says time is running out. That voice does not motivate, it drains. And the body listens. Shoulders tighten. Breathing gets shallow. Energy leaks away. Delay then looks like laziness from the outside, but inside it feels closer to exhaustion. This pattern repeats everywhere. In work left unfinished. In phone calls never made. In conversations postponed because the timing never feels right. People promise themselves tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow comes and looks exactly like yesterday. The problem is rarely time. Time is generous. Everyone gets the same 24 hours. The problem lives deeper. It sits where fear quietly hides. Fear of doing it wrong. Fear of not being enough. Fear of opening a door and discovering there is no solid ground on the other side. When fear takes the wheel, the mind looks for cover. Delay becomes a shelter. Not a good one, but a familiar one. In many American cities, life runs on speed and pressure. Highways stay packed even late at night. Phones buzz constantly. Productivity is praised like a virtue. The message is clear. Move faster, do more, keep up. Yet the inner world does not follow that pace. When outer pressure rises faster than inner balance, something gives. Some people burn out. Others grow numb. Many fall into delay. Not because they do not care, but because caring costs too much energy. Starting feels like lifting a weight with tired arms. So they wait. And waiting slowly turns into a habit. Delay carries a hidden cost. It eats away at self-trust. Each unfinished thing becomes a small promise broken. One or two can be ignored. Dozens pile up and form a quiet shame. The mind starts believing its own excuses less and less. Anxiety grows. Sleep gets lighter. The body stays tense even at rest. This is no longer about efficiency. It becomes about how a person relates to themselves. The more harsh the inner judgment, the harder it is to move. Pushing harder only tightens the knot. From an Eastern way of seeing, this struggle looks different. Action is not meant to be forced. Life moves like water. It flows downhill, not because it tries, but because it follows its nature. When people push themselves against their own current, resistance appears. Delay is one sign of that resistance. It is not a flaw to erase. It is a signal. Something inside is out of rhythm. When rhythm is lost, effort multiplies and results shrink. Forcing action without restoring balance is like rowing against a strong tide. The arms tire quickly and the shore does not get closer. There is a quieter approach. Not giving up. Not escaping responsibility, but softening the grip, like listening before acting. When the urge to delay appears, instead of attacking it, one can pause and look. What is being avoided? Not the task itself, but the feeling attached to it, uncertainty, exposure, the risk of failure. When those feelings are met with awareness instead of pressure, they loosen. Action then becomes possible again, not as a battle, but as a natural next step. Not all delay is harmful. Sometimes waiting is wisdom. Fruit picked too early tastes sour. Timing matters. Healthy delay comes from clarity. Unhealthy delay comes from confusion and fear. Telling them apart requires honesty, not the loud kind that judges, but the quiet kind that notices. When delay protects rest, reflection, or alignment, it serves life. When it drains confidence and deepens anxiety, it asks for attention. The way forward is not heroic discipline, it is balance. When inner and outer worlds move together, action feels lighter. Starting does not demand courage every time. It becomes ordinary again, like breathing, like walking out the door. Delay loses its grip when it is no longer treated as an enemy, but as a message pointing back to the center. There is a moment many people recognize but rarely name. It happens when sitting still feels harder than being busy, yet starting feels impossible. The body is present, but the mind wanders in circles. Plans are made, rewritten, then quietly abandoned. This is not confusion about what to do. It is confusion about how to meet oneself. Fear often wears many masks here. Sometimes it looks like perfection, sometimes like endless preparation, sometimes like waiting for motivation to magically appear. Underneath, it is still fear of stepping into the unknown. In American culture, effort is often praised above awareness. Grind harder, push through, power past resistance. This approach works with machines. It fails with the human spirit. When pressure meets fear, delay grows stronger. The mind learns to associate action with pain. Over time, even small tasks trigger resistance. The gas tank is full, but the engine will not turn over. Forcing it only floods the system. From an older Eastern lens, action without harmony is incomplete. True movement comes from alignment, not willpower alone. There's an idea often misunderstood as doing nothing. In reality, it means not acting against the natural state. When a person is tense, pushing harder adds tension. When a person is scattered, adding speed creates chaos. The wiser move is adjustment, not acceleration. When inner balance returns, action resumes on its own, like water finding its way around rocks. This does not mean sitting and waiting forever. It means shifting how action begins. Instead of asking how fast something can be finished, the question becomes how gently it can start. A single step taken without inner resistance carries more power than a dozen forced moves. When fear is acknowledged rather than denied, it loses some of its grip. The nervous system settles. Breathing deepens. Attention comes back to the present moment. From there, movement feels less threatening. Many people confuse delay with weakness. In truth, delay often appears in those who care deeply. Caring creates stakes. Stakes invite fear. Fear freezes motion. Understanding this changes the relationship with delay. It is no longer an enemy to crush, but a doorway to insight. What matters is not eliminating fear, but moving in a way that does not feed it. There is also a subtle difference between choosing the right moment and endlessly postponing. Choosing comes with calm. Postponing comes with unease. The body knows the difference. Calm waiting restores energy. Anxious delay drains it. Learning to listen to that signal is part of returning to balance. When waiting feels heavy, something is misaligned. When it feels spacious, it is likely appropriate. In modern life, distractions make this harder to notice. Screens fill every quiet gap. Noise replaces reflection. Delay hides behind scrolling, errands, and constant motion. Stillness feels uncomfortable because it reveals the tension underneath. Yet stillness is exactly where clarity begins. Without it, action remains scattered. With it, priorities reorganize themselves naturally. Once balance is restored, effort changes texture. It becomes steady instead of frantic, consistent instead of dramatic. Work gets done without inner arguments. Decisions feel simpler, not because life becomes easy, but because energy stops leaking into self-conflict. Delay fades into the background, not eliminated by force, but dissolved by understanding. This middle ground is fragile at first. Old habits return easily. The urge to push or avoid swings back and forth. Patience is essential here. Balance is not a permanent state. It is something revisited again and again. Each time awareness deepens, the return becomes quicker. Action follows more smoothly. The current is found again. This is the heart of the shift. Stop treating delay as a personal failure. See it as a signpost. Something inside is asking for alignment before movement. When that request is honored, action regains its natural rhythm. Over time, it becomes clear that the real work is not speeding up life, but learning how to meet it without tension. Many people believe they need stronger discipline. What they often need is softer attention. When attention softens, the body relaxes. When the body relaxes, the mind stops fighting itself. Action then stops feeling like a demand and starts feeling like a response. There is a kind of delay that heals. It shows up as rest after long strain, reflection after confusion, silence after too much noise. This kind of waiting brings clarity. It sharpens direction. But there is another kind that quietly erodes life. It leaves a dull ache in the chest. Nights feel restless. Mornings begin with weight instead of curiosity. This delay does not protect. It drains. Knowing which one is present changes everything. Harmful delay rarely announces itself. It blends into routine. It hides in small comforts and familiar distractions. It promises safety but delivers stagnation. Relationships suffer. Opportunities pass quietly. The world keeps moving while the inner world feels stuck. This is when imbalance deepens. Not because life is cruel, but because the inner compass has lost its center. The way back is not dramatic. No sudden breakthrough is required. It begins with noticing the body. Tension is a message. Shallow breath is a message. Heaviness is a message. Ignoring these signs keeps the cycle alive. Listening to them gently starts to unwind it. When the inner state is acknowledged, even without immediate solutions, something shifts. Resistance eases, space opens. From this space, action becomes possible again. Not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. A phone call gets made, a page gets written. A conversation finally happens. These actions may look small, but they rebuild trust with oneself. Each completed step restores a bit of confidence. The mind learns that movement does not always lead to pain. Fear retreats when it is no longer fed by avoidance. This process asks for patience, especially later in life when habits feel deeply rooted. But age also brings an advantage. Experience teaches that forcing rarely leads to peace. Many have already seen what endless striving costs. This understanding makes gentler paths easier to accept. Strength is no longer measured by how much pressure one can endure, but by how well one can remain balanced within change. Modern society rarely rewards this approach. It favors speed and visible output. Yet inner balance quietly supports everything that lasts. Health, relationships, meaningful work. When balance is lost, no amount of effort can fully compensate. Delay then becomes chronic. When balance is restored, action flows with less struggle. Life feels cooperative again instead of adversarial. The deeper lesson is simple but not easy. Delay is not a defect to be erased. It is feedback. When listened to, it guides adjustment. When ignored, it grows louder. Treating it with curiosity instead of judgment changes its role. It stops blocking the path and starts pointing toward it. Eventually, a different rhythm emerges. Days feel less rushed even when full. Decisions feel grounded. Effort feels proportional. There is room to breathe inside action. This rhythm does not eliminate difficulty, but it makes difficulty workable. Movement and rest find their place again. When action arises from alignment, it carries quiet confidence. There is no need to prove worth through constant motion. Doing and being support each other. Delay loses its power because it no longer serves a purpose. Balance has returned, and with it, a steadier way of living. After noticing how delay grows out of tension, the view begins to widen. The struggle is no longer just about unfinished tasks, but about how a person stands inside life itself. There is a habit many fall into without realizing it. The habit of tightening. Tightening schedules, tightening standards, tightening control. Mornings start with lists. Days are measured by output. Nights end with silent judgment. The harder the grip, the heavier everything feels. Action turns stiff. Delay sneaks in as a quiet rebellion of the inner world. There's a moment when effort crosses a line and becomes force. It often sounds like a voice saying, "This must be done now, no matter what." The body hears that voice and braces. Breathing shortens. The chest tightens. Even simple actions feel uphill. From the outside, it looks like procrastination. Inside, it feels like pushing a stuck truck with an empty tank. No matter how hard the body leans in, the wheels barely move. From an older Eastern understanding, life does not respond well to force. It responds to alignment. There is an unseen order moving through seasons, through growth and decline, through rest and motion. When people move with that order, effort feels supported. When they push against it, friction appears. Delay is one form of that friction, not as punishment, but as feedback. Something is off. Timing, direction, or inner state is not matching the moment. Many misunderstand this and think the answer is to let go completely, to stop caring, to drift. That is not what this view points to. Drifting creates its own kind of suffering. The difference lies in how action begins. Action born from tension carries tension forward. Action born from clarity carries ease, even when the work is hard. The question is not whether to act, but how. There is a simple truth often ignored. Not every moment is ready for every action. Forcing growth out of season weakens the roots. Waiting for the right conditions strengthens them. In daily life, this shows up clearly. A conversation pushed too early turns defensive. A decision rushed under pressure turns shallow. Work done while the mind is scattered takes twice the energy and leaves half the result. Timing is not an excuse. It is intelligence. This way of seeing invites a shift. Instead of asking how to overpower resistance, the attention turns to why resistance is present. Often it comes from chasing outcomes too tightly. Success, approval, security. When the mind fixates on results, fear grows. Fear freezes movement. Delay follows. Letting go of obsession with the finish line does not mean losing direction. It means trusting the path enough to walk it step by step without constant self-threat. There is an approach that looks passive from the outside, but is deeply active within. It begins with sensing the moment, noticing energy, noticing readiness. When the inner state matches the task, movement feels natural. When it does not, adjustment is needed. Maybe the task is broken into smaller pieces. Maybe rest is required. Maybe expectations soften. This is not avoidance. It is recalibration. In American life, this can feel unfamiliar. The culture often celebrates pushing through at all costs. Yet many have lived long enough to see where that road leads: exhaustion, resentment, hollow achievement. There comes a time when working harder no longer brings peace. Something else is needed. A return to balance, a way of acting that does not betray the inner world. Delay begins to change its meaning here. It stops being a flaw and starts becoming information. When listened to, it guides action back into rhythm. When ignored, it grows louder. The choice is not between action and delay, but between forced movement and aligned movement. One drains life, the other sustains it. This is where the path turns, not away from responsibility, but toward a different relationship with it. Once this shift begins, the inner world feels less like a battlefield and more like a landscape. Hills, valleys, seasons of growth and rest. Action no longer stands apart from life. It becomes part of it. There is a quiet form of doing that does not announce itself. No slogans, no pressure, just a steady response to what the moment allows. This way of moving does not rush, yet it does not stall. It follows conditions the way a river follows the shape of the land. Many people confuse this with waiting for perfect conditions. Perfection never arrives. What matters is suitability. The body knows when it is ready. The mind knows when it is clear. When either is ignored, resistance appears. When both are respected, effort feels proportionate. This is why some days a task feels impossible, and another day the same task feels simple. Nothing about the task has changed. The inner state has. There is an old habit of measuring worth by how much strain one can endure. Strain becomes proof of seriousness. Ease is mistaken for weakness. Yet in lived experience, ease often signals alignment. When something is right, it tends to fit. Not without effort, but without constant self-conflict. Action taken from this place may be slower at first, but it travels farther. It does not burn the fuel it needs to keep going. This understanding reframes the role of effort. Effort is no longer about pushing against inner resistance. It becomes about maintaining clarity. When clarity fades, effort rises and results fall. When clarity returns, effort drops and movement resumes. The mind stops arguing with itself. The body follows through more willingly. Delay loses its emotional charge. It no longer feels like failure, just a cue to adjust. There is also a release that happens when outcomes loosen their grip. Many delays are rooted in imagined futures. What if it goes wrong? What if it disappoints? What if it exposes weakness? These questions pull attention away from the present step. Fear grows in that gap. When attention returns to what can be done now, fear has less space to spread. The future remains unknown, but the present becomes workable. This does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. Responsibility shifts from controlling results to honoring the process. Doing what can be done, when it can be done, with the energy that is available. No more, no less. This steadiness builds trust over time. Trust with oneself. Trust with life. Action becomes reliable because it is not fueled by fear or force. In later years, this perspective often lands more easily. The body speaks louder. The cost of ignoring it becomes clear. Many have already lived through periods of relentless striving. They have seen how success without balance leaves little behind. This lived knowledge opens the door to a gentler strength, a strength that does not need to prove itself. In this space, delay transforms. It no longer traps. It informs. It points toward timing, readiness, and alignment. When these are honored, movement resumes naturally. Not dramatic, not heroic, but sustainable. Life begins to feel less like something to conquer and more like something to cooperate with. This is the quiet heart of the teaching. Action does not have to fight life to matter. When action arises from harmony, it carries its own momentum. The inner brake releases, the wheels turn, the journey continues without constant strain. With time, this way of acting settles into the bones. It is no longer an idea to remember, but a posture toward life. Effort still exists, but it is cleaner. It does not drag extra weight. There is less inner bargaining, less silent resistance. When something needs to be done, the body leans in without the usual tightening. When it cannot be done yet, waiting does not feel like guilt. It feels like respect for the moment. There is a subtle courage in this. Not the courage to push harder, but the courage to stop forcing. To admit that control has limits. To trust that life has its own intelligence. Many delays come from trying to manage every outcome before taking a step. This creates paralysis. Releasing that habit frees energy. Action begins again, not because fear is gone, but because fear is no longer in charge. This approach also changes how success and failure are held. Success becomes a byproduct, not a trophy. Failure becomes information, not a verdict. When results loosen their grip, action feels safer. Safer action invites movement. Movement dissolves delay. The cycle reverses itself. Instead of delay feeding fear, clarity feeds motion. There is an image that fits here. Trying to force a door that opens inward. The harder it is pushed, the more firmly it stays shut. Stepping back and pulling gently is enough. Many people spend years pushing, convinced the problem is strength. The shift comes when direction changes. Effort becomes appropriate instead of excessive. In daily life, this shows up in simple ways. Starting with what is available rather than what is ideal. Speaking when words are ready rather than rehearsed to perfection. Resting without turning rest into another task. These choices seem small, but they reorganize the inner world. Action grows roots again. It does not topple at the first sign of resistance. The relationship with delay at this point is calm. When it appears, it is met with curiosity. What is misaligned? Timing, expectation, energy. The answer does not always come immediately. Patience becomes part of the practice. Patience not as endurance, but as trust. Trust that clarity returns when given space. Trust that movement follows clarity. This trust changes the tone of life. Days feel less crowded even when full. Decisions feel grounded rather than rushed. There is room to breathe inside responsibility. The constant sense of being behind begins to fade. Not because everything is finished, but because life is no longer treated as a race. This is where balance reveals its strength. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. It supports action without exhausting the spirit. Delay loses its power because it no longer serves a purpose. It was never the enemy. It was a signal asking for a different way of moving. When action and inner state align, life feels cooperative. Effort meets response. Movement meets support. This does not remove difficulty, but it makes difficulty workable. The path continues, not through force, but through harmony. After learning to stop forcing life, the question quietly shifts. How does this understanding live inside an ordinary day? Not in ideas, not in moments of insight, but in the hours between waking and sleep. This is where things either change or fade. Balance, once glimpsed, must be practiced in small, human ways. Otherwise, it stays abstract and delay slowly creeps back in. The first place this shows up is attention. Delay does not live in the present moment. It feeds on what has already happened and what has not yet arrived. Regret pulls the mind backward. Worry pulls it forward. The body stays here, but the mind is never home. Action becomes difficult because action only happens now. When attention leaves the present, movement loses its footing. The mind plans, doubts, revises, and waits. Nothing actually begins. There is a simple but uncomfortable truth. Most resistance softens the moment attention returns to what is directly in front of us. Not the whole task, not the future outcome, just the next small, concrete step. The hand touching the table, the breath moving in the chest, the sound of the room. This is not escape. It is grounding. When awareness settles, the inner noise drops. Fear has less room to spin stories. Movement becomes possible again. Stillness plays a quiet role here. Not dramatic silence, but brief pauses woven into the day. A few minutes sitting before starting work. A moment of standing still before opening the door. These pauses reset direction. They allow the inner state to be felt instead of ignored. When tension is noticed early, it can soften. When ignored, it hardens into delay. Stillness is not doing nothing. It is listening. Many discover that delay often rises from trying to swallow too much at once. A task becomes a mountain. The mind looks up, feels small, and steps back. The body follows. Breaking things down is not a strategy. It is a way of restoring proportion. When the next step fits the moment, resistance drops. Starting no longer feels like a leap. It feels like walking. Environment matters more than people admit. A cluttered space feeds a cluttered mind. Constant noise scatters attention. When surroundings are chaotic, inner balance has to work harder just to stay upright. Small changes make a difference. Clearing a desk, opening a window, stepping outside for a few minutes. These are not productivity tricks. They are ways of signaling safety to the nervous system. When safety returns, movement follows. Nature offers a reminder many forget. Nothing there rushes, yet everything moves. Trees do not strain to grow. Rivers do not argue with their path. Spending time outside recalibrates inner rhythm. Even brief contact shifts perspective. The body remembers a slower pace. The mind loosens its grip. Delay, which thrives on tension, loses strength in this wider rhythm. There is also the matter of results. Attachment to outcome quietly fuels delay. When success feels too important, fear sharpens. When failure feels threatening, the mind hesitates. Letting go of results does not mean acting without care. It means acting without self-threat. Doing what can be done, then allowing the rest to unfold. This lightens action. It restores honesty. Effort becomes cleaner. Over time, these small practices change the tone of life. Days feel less crowded even when busy. Starting does not require negotiation with fear each time. When delay appears, it is met early before it hardens. Attention returns. Scale is adjusted. Balance is restored. Action resumes. This is not transformation through force. It is transformation through consistency. The kind built from many small moments of awareness. When life is lived this way, delay no longer dominates. It dissolves quietly. replaced by a steadier relationship with time, effort, and oneself. As these habits settle in, something subtle begins to change. Action no longer feels like a test of character. It feels more like a conversation with the moment. There is listening before movement, not hesitation, but attunement. The inner world and outer demands start to speak the same language. Delay loses its sharp edge because it is no longer carrying unspoken fear. One of the quiet shifts happens around effort. Many people carry an old belief that effort must hurt to count. If it feels smooth, it must be shallow. Yet lived experience often proves the opposite. Effort that hurts usually points to misalignment. Effort that flows tends to be sustainable. This does not mean avoiding difficulty. It means not adding unnecessary struggle to it. When effort matches capacity, the body stays present instead of bracing. This is especially clear when dealing with long-standing responsibilities. Work that spans months, family matters that never fully resolve, personal habits built over decades. Approaching these with force creates cycles of push and collapse. Approaching them with rhythm creates continuity. A little each day, done with attention, carries more weight than bursts of intense effort followed by withdrawal. Delay thrives in extremes. Balance weakens it. The way time is held also shifts. Instead of treating time as an enemy always slipping away, it becomes a partner. Some days offer momentum, others ask for restraint. Honoring both keeps energy intact. When time is respected rather than fought, urgency softens. Action becomes timely instead of frantic. Delay has fewer openings to take hold. Many people notice that relationships respond to this change as well. Conversations become less defensive. Listening improves. Words arrive with better timing. Pushing a point too hard often meets resistance. Waiting for the right moment invites openness. This mirrors the same principle at work inside. Timing carries wisdom. Ignoring it costs energy. Respecting it saves effort. There is also a deeper letting go that takes place around identity. Delay often feeds on rigid self-images. The need to appear capable. The fear of appearing uncertain. When identity loosens, action becomes freer. Mistakes lose their sting. Learning replaces self-protection. Movement becomes exploratory rather than performative. This shift alone dissolves much of the tension that fuels delay. Daily life still brings pressure. Schedules fill. Obligations stack up. This approach does not remove any of that. What changes is the internal stance. Pressure is met without collapse. Demands are met without self-betrayal. When limits are reached, they are acknowledged instead of overridden. Rest is taken before exhaustion forces it. This prevents the deep fatigue where delay becomes chronic. There is a quiet confidence that grows here. Not confidence built on achievement, but on reliability. The trust that when something matters, action will come. Not instantly, not perfectly, but honestly. This trust reduces the need for self-policing. Inner arguments fade. Energy once spent on resistance returns to use. The role of practice becomes clear. This way of living is not a single decision. It is a series of choices repeated daily. Returning attention, adjusting scale, softening grip on outcomes. Each repetition strengthens the habit of alignment. Delay loses relevance because life is no longer approached as a constant emergency. What remains is a steadier pace. Movement and rest support each other. Effort feels appropriate. Days close without the familiar sense of falling behind. Not everything is finished, but nothing feels abandoned. This is the ground where action can continue without burning out the will. With time, This way of living stops feeling like a method and starts feeling like home. Action rises naturally from presence. Rest arrives without guilt. Delay no longer carries the weight of shame or fear. When it appears, it is brief and informative, not sticky and draining. It points towards something simple that has been overlooked. A body that needs pause. A task that needs to be smaller. An expectation that needs loosening. There is a quiet maturity in accepting this rhythm. Many people spend years fighting themselves, believing that inner resistance is a flaw to be conquered. Eventually, it becomes clear that resistance is often the result of not being heard. When the inner world is ignored, it protests. When it is met, it cooperates. Life becomes easier not because demands shrink, but because friction fades. This approach also changes how endings are handled. Finishing a task no longer feels like crossing a finish line under pressure. It feels like setting something down with care. Satisfaction replaces relief. There is space to acknowledge effort without inflating it. This keeps momentum healthy. The next action does not inherit leftover tension from the last one. Even setbacks look different here. Moments of drift still happen. Old habits return. Delay stretches longer than expected. Instead of panic, there is recognition. The cycle is noticed early, attention comes back. Balance is restored. Progress resumes. Nothing dramatic is required. No self-punishment. No vow to overhaul life overnight. Steadiness outperforms intensity. This way of moving suits later stages of life especially well. Energy is no longer endless. Time feels more precious. Priorities simplify. The desire to live without inner conflict grows stronger. Forcing becomes less attractive. Alignment becomes essential. Action taken from this place carries depth. It is rooted in experience rather than ambition. The world outside continues at its pace. Deadlines remain, responsibilities do not disappear. What changes is the relationship with them. Life is no longer a series of obstacles to push through. It becomes a flow to participate in. Some moments call for effort, others for restraint. Both are honored. Delay loses its role as a defense mechanism because there is nothing to defend against. In the end, this is not about fixing a habit. It is about restoring a relationship. A relationship with time, with effort, with oneself. When that relationship steadies, action and rest fall into place. Movement happens without inner violence. Waiting happens without decay. The two support each other. What remains is a sense of quiet continuity. Days linked together without the constant feeling of starting over. Life feels lived from the center instead of the edges. Delay, once feared, becomes irrelevant. Not because it was defeated, but because its message was understood. And when understanding takes root, balance holds. The path continues, not hurried, not stalled, simply alive. By the time this reflection reaches its end, one thing should feel different. Delay no longer looks like a personal flaw that needs fixing. It looks like a message that was waiting to be heard. Across everything we have walked through together, one lesson stands out quietly but firmly. Life resists force, but it responds to alignment. The more a person tries to wrestle time, willpower, and fear into submission, the more tangled everything becomes. The moment that struggle eases, movement finds its way back on its own. There is a hard truth many avoid. Most of what people call discipline is just fear wearing a sharp suit. Fear of falling behind. Fear of looking weak. Fear of wasting time. That fear drives effort, but it also poisons it. It turns action into pressure and rest into guilt. Delay grows in that soil, not because someone lacks strength, but because something inside refuses to be bullied any longer. The deeper lesson here is not about doing more. It is about doing from the right place. When action comes from clarity, it carries weight without heaviness. When it comes from fear, even small tasks feel like dragging a truck uphill with an empty gas tank. No amount of self-criticism fixes that. Only honesty does. Honesty asks uncomfortable questions, not the kind shouted in moments of frustration, but the kind asked quietly when no one is watching. What am I really avoiding right now? Is it the task or the feeling tied to it? Am I pushing because the moment calls for it, or because I am afraid to slow down? If I stopped forcing for a moment, what would actually change? Most people never pause long enough to ask these things. They stay busy instead. Busy feels productive. Busy feels safe. But busy often hides drift. And drift, left unattended, turns into years that look full on the outside and hollow on the inside. There is another way to live. It is not flashy. It does not sell well in a culture addicted to speed. But it lasts. It begins with attention, with learning how to stand in the present moment without immediately trying to escape it. When attention settles, the inner noise fades. Fear loses its grip. Action stops feeling like a threat. Delay loosens because it no longer serves a purpose. This way of living asks for courage of a different kind. Not the courage to push harder, but the courage to stop pretending force is the answer. It asks for patience. Patience not as waiting passively, but as trusting timing. Trusting rhythm. Trusting that life does not need to be beaten into shape to move forward. Look back at your own life for a moment. Where does delay keep showing up? Not just in tasks, but in conversations, decisions, changes you know are overdue. What would happen if instead of judging that delay, you listened to it? What is it protecting? What is it warning against? What is it asking you to realign? And here is a harder question. If you stopped measuring your worth by speed and output, what would remain? What kind of action would rise if fear was no longer driving the wheel? What kind of rest would finally feel clean? These questions are not meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to stay with you. To surface when you notice yourself tightening, when you feel that familiar resistance creeping in. Every time you choose alignment over force, something shifts, not dramatically, but deeply. Days begin to link together with less friction. Effort becomes steady instead of frantic. Delay loses its power because it is no longer being fed. If this way of seeing resonates, stay close. Follow the channel. Not for quick fixes, but for reflections that cut through noise and get to the center. Share your thoughts in the comments. Not polished answers, but real ones. Where delay shows up for you, what you are beginning to see differently. These conversations matter. They sharpen understanding and remind us we are not walking this path alone. Life moves whether we fight it or not. The question is how we move with it, with clenched fists or open hands. If you are ready to explore that difference, stay here. There is more to uncover.